I know we've all heard the expression soy boy once before. It's frequently claimed by the right-wing oriented talking heads, commentators, sometimes politicians, etc., where there's some kind of plot to feminize men. And somewhere there's this shadowy, unknowable group that is trying to turn men into women or feminize men in general because that would make us easier to control. And this is generally attributed to some kind of New World Order conspiracy or some kind of Jewish conspiracy. No matter what, it basically relies upon pseudoscience and irrational conspiratorial thinking. As examples of this alleged feminization, they generally point to a stereotypical young liberal male, often confused for the Marxists due to their ignorance, as represented by social media. Frequently, images such as the aesthetics of colorfully dyed hair, pierced ears, less muscle mass than men, what is traditionally seen as preferable, wears glasses, and generally exhibits what are perceived to be feminine traits. These individuals here are considered prominent examples. People who no doubt have suffered psychological harm from being such a social media target by right-wing trolls. Behavior common among them is an opposition to the use of violence, in domestic politics anyway. They gravitate towards ideas of equality and anti-racism. They also have a decreased appreciation for activities which are traditionally described as being masculine. Now, we get the term soy boys from this perception that it has been the increased consumption of soy milk and other soy products, which they claim contains estrogen, which leads to this feminization, that if you increase the levels of the estrogen hormone inside of men, they'll become weak, and then this is the force behind the feminization. The science doesn't confirm this. Firstly, there is no human estrogen hormone in soy. There's isoflavones, a type of plant estrogen called phytoestrogen that is similar in function to human estrogen, but with much weaker effects. Now, soy isoflavones can bind to estrogen receptors in the body and cause either weak estrogenic or anti-estrogenic activity. The two major soy isoflavones are genistein and didazein. It is structurally different from the estrogen in our bodies. A plant-based estrogen does not convert into the estrogen our bodies make when we eat it. So, does soy or isoflavones actually affect male reproductive hormones? Well, the answer is no. At least one meta-analysis shows that concerns that the phytoestrogens, isoflavones, in soy may feminize men contribute to be raised. Several studies and case reports describing feminization effects, including lowering testosterone levels and raising estrogen levels in men, have been published. For this reason, the clinical data were meta-analyzed to determine whether soy or isoflavone intake affected total testosterone, free testosterone, estradiol, estrone, and sex hormone binding globulin. Regardless of the statistical model, no significant effects of soy protein or isoflavone intake on any of the outcomes measured were found. Sub-analysis of the data according to isoflavone dose and study duration also showed no effect. This updated and expanded meta-analysis indicates that regardless of dose and study duration, neither soy protein nor isoflavone exposure affects hormone levels in men. Does an increased level of estrogen in a man's body have negative effects? Does this estrogen account for making men more feminine? No. There is no link between male behavior and soy/estrogen products. Excess levels of estrogen in men can cause infertility, erectile dysfunction, stunted growth during puberty, and gynecomastia. The truth is, there is supposed to be some degree of estrogen in the male body. Estrogens have traditionally been considered female hormones. Nevertheless, the presence of estrogen in males has been known for over 90 years. Initial studies suggested that estrogen was deleterious to male reproduction because exogenous treatments included developmental abnormalities. However, demonstrations of estrogen synthesis in the testis and high concentrations of 17B estradiol in the testis fluid suggested that the female hormone might have a function in normal male reproduction. Identification of estrogen receptors and development of biological radioisotope methods to assess estradiol binding revealed that male reproductive tract expresses estrogen receptors extensively from neonatal period to adulthood. Consuming soy products will not raise the amount of soy in your body. And even if it does, it is statistically insignificant. You have to have a massive, huge intake in order to have any changes. Now, has there been any increase in estrogen among men? Well, the short answer is no. There are several studies, many of which conflict with each other, but there is no actual proof that there has been an increase in estrogen in men. And even then, if there was, it would be insignificant and meaningless anyway. So what is driving this perceived feminization of men? I think it comes down to two important aspects. Much of what we perceive as feminine or effeminate is wholly socially constructed. There is no gene that says you have to have or are more prone to have long hair, or use certain vocabulary, or have particular hobbies and interests. These are complete socially constructed. There are entire societies where these things don't even exist. These traits have changed over centuries, swapping from one gender to another. None of this is set in stone, your genetics. The answer is, they think it's effeminate because they've associated it with femininity, or rather, society as a whole has. Generally, this perception of feminization has been of younger generations, the millennials and the Gen Z. Now, what else do we know of their behaviors? Well, there is something significant that does stick out. We do know that aggressive behavior, or more particularly violent crime among millennials and Gen Z, are much lower than they were with boomers and Gen X. In 2021, there were about 123,000 serious violent crimes committed by youths between the ages of 12 and 17 in the United States, an increase from the year before. However, this is still a significant decrease from the 1994 levels, when violent crimes committed by youths hit a peak of over 1.05 million serious crimes. This is not only a downward trend in the number of violent crimes committed by youths, but also in the share of crimes involving youths. In 2021, around 9.7% of serious violent crime cases in the United States involved teenagers, an increase from the previous year where 7.5% showed violent crimes involving teenagers. The share of serious violent crimes involving children between 12 and 17 years old reached a peak in 1994 at 25.1%. Now, California itself, who does tend to keep better records on these kinds of things, say that there has been a significant decrease in general crime as it relates to younger generations. The violent felony arrest rate for young adults 18 to 22 dropped by more than 50% over the last 25 years, from 1,700 per 100,000 residents in 1994 to 840 in 2019. The drop is even more notable as the rate for adults in their late 30s and older increased over the same period. This steep decline is the driving factor behind the most recent shift in age crime curve. After representing about 25% of violent felony arrests among adults for decades, young adults now account for 16% of these arrests. And it would appear that the Department of Justice agrees with this kind of analysis. The estimated number of youth arrests for violent crime, which include murder, robbery, and aggravated assault, has declined since the mid-2000s. By 2020, the number of violent crime arrests involving youth reached a new low, 78% below the 1994 peak, and half the number 10 years earlier. The same goes for sexual violence as well. Follow-up analysis reveal that 4 measures of baby boom Gen X men had significantly higher rates of sexual aggression than same generation women. But millennial men and women had statistically similar rates. This outcome replicated the pattern termed the millennial shift, which was detected earlier in earlier work. That means they suggest that the millennial shift involves higher sexual aggression rates reported by millennial women compared to older generation women, in conjunction with the lower rates reported by millennial men compared to older generation men. We speculate that the millennial shift reflects changes in the traditional sexual script. With this information now understood, the question is, what caused it? Now, from here on out, I am giving my opinion. Unfortunately, I do not have the resources to carry out the actual study necessary to verify what I'm saying. So this is merely my opinion. This is not scientific fact. It is my opinion that in this modern age, our environment has changed. And one of the things that we do know from evolution, survival of the fittest, etc., is that what spurs change in human beings is a change in environment. What we have now is a different environment than we had 1,000 years ago, or even really 100 years ago. And in fact, the last 100 years of human history have gone insanely fast compared to what human history has been. And keep in mind that we went from the first airplane flying from the Wright brothers to landing on the moon in 66 years. That is astronomical when you think about it. So, what am I proposing? I am proposing that we are going through an evolutionary change, and this should not be expected. We have completely changed the environment that we live in. Industrialization has done that. Agriculture has done that. But what we live in now, the most advanced thing that exists, is obviously going to change us, and we are going to change along with it. The fact that now more people than ever require glasses to see things that are farther away is an evolutionary act itself. Things aren't as far away as they used to be. We're not farmers looking at fields and searching for predators and all of the things we used to do in ancient times. Everything is right up close to us now. Our computers, books, television, everything. So we don't, technically, according to evolution, we don't need to be able to see very far. So that explains that change. And we'd be kind of naive to think that this would be the only change that would take place. It is my belief that this decrease in aggression, and this isn't just a decrease in aggression among men, it's seemingly for women as well, has taken place because of the environment that we live in essentially no longer requires it. As Steven Pinker noted in one of his books, if we took one of our ancestors and showed them our lives today and the amount of violence that we go through today, he would be astounded by what he sees. What he saw only, like, say, 200 years ago, let alone 1,000 years ago, would have been astronomically higher than what we have now. Because today, we have an abundance that has never been seen in human history. There really is no actual need to go out and fight over resources. We have enough resources in the world for everyone. In fact, we have even a greater amount of resources than we have a population. The problem is that we have a distribution problem. We have a management problem. And that problem would be, in my opinion, capitalism. We have biologically moved past the ancient societies where we had to fight sometimes other tribes in order to get enough to eat, in order to survive. The aggression that we used to be able to go out and fight animals or to conquer other tribes in order to survive, which at the time you may have argued actually was necessary to fight for scarce resources, isn't necessary anymore. That aspect of our nature is now out of date. We don't actually physically need it in order to survive. We can just walk to the store and just pick something up. Now, I know what a lot of particular guys are saying. Well, this is now weak men. Weak men are going to create weak times, and weak times create blah, blah, blah. I don't buy that at all. Empires don't rise and fall because of weak men or strong men. They rise and fall because of politics and economics. Mostly economics. So this claim about the weak men or strong men making them is just complete nonsense. Another argument that they would make, well, what if there's a great disaster and now we have to start going back to living as we did say 200 years ago. Okay. That's a possibility, but that doesn't change what's happened. This change that took place, this de-aggression, is a result of our environment. I'm not actually arguing whether it's right or wrong. I'm arguing that it happened and why it happened. Yeah, you could make that. Okay, what if global warming floods the entire world and the entire world's underwater? Why don't you have gills? You could make all kinds of arguments. But that's not the point here. The point here is to understand why it happened and to give it some kind of a reason that's not grounded in some conspiracy theory nonsense. And as this aggression decreases among younger generations, they may have a tendency to steer away from sports or activities or hobbies that are generally perceived as being masculine because they don't feel that kind of aggression, so they don't identify with that. If you just simply changed it, then there wouldn't actually be a problem because these things that are defined as, traditionally male, like activities and whatnot, really are gender neutral. Anybody can just go and do them, and that's okay. So if we got rid of that, we would probably see less of this so-called feminization. It's just a movement away from some activities towards others, or to some personality traits to others that are not something someone planned. They're a result of our environment and the changes that we have made to it. We don't just have global warming as a result of the changes that we've made to the global environment. Those changes appear in us as well. And that is my theory. Again, to reiterate, I'm not arguing if it's a good thing they happened or a bad thing they happened. I'm just saying that it did happen and that this is my theory as to why it happened. And I think this is a fairly good explanation as to why the millennials and the Gen Zers do have a less aggressive tone to them. Like they're very clearly not as physically aggressive as, say, Gen Xers or baby boomers. It's just a difference. So you could argue that the younger generations are more passive aggressive. You could argue that. But here we're trying to find a scientific explanation. And I believe that can be found in evolutionary psychology. And I think that's an important field. It's something that would be something to be looked into. Unfortunately, I don't have the resources to carry out large amounts of personality tests. I don't have the power to, take gene samples and see if there has been a difference that has occurred over time. And that very well could be the case. I mean, COVID alone can alter your genes that you pass on to another generation. So I don't have the resources to be able to put this hypothesis to a test. It's just a hypothesis that I want to put out there. And you can think whatever it is that you want to think. I just welcome the opportunity to maybe one day be able to put this into an actual study. Thank you for watching. If you like this program, then please head over to my Patreon page and set up a monthly donation. It's your donations that keep this program running. Also, if you would like, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share in various social media.